The clinking of forks against ceramic was a dull thud in my ears, drowned out by the boisterous laughter from the head of the table. My name is Angela, and at 28, I was the youngest of the Craig siblings, but I felt like the oldest, carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I'd just come in from my third job of the day, waitressing at the diner after a full shift at the hardware store and a few hours tending to our neighbours' horses. Meanwhile, my brothers, Carson and Connor, were already deep into their usual routine. Carson, 34 and the eldest, thumped his fist on the table, making the gravy boat jump. "Another banner year, boys. Profits are up, thanks to our management." Connor, 32, his shadow, nodded vigorously, a smug grin plastered across his face. They were talking about the ranch, of course, the very place I'd poured my sweat and tears into since I was old enough to hold a shovel. Profit they never bothered to share, or even acknowledge my part in. It had always been like this. Growing up, Carson and Connor were the boys, the future of the ranch. I was just Angela, the soft one, good for mucking stalls and cooking meals, but never for anything that truly mattered. My father, bless his heart, had tried to shield me, but he was often too busy or too tired to intervene. The funeral, just last week, had been the final insult. As the dirt settled on Dad's coffin, Carson and Connor were already back at the barn, clinking beer bottles. I overheard them, loud and clear, dividing up the property, the cattle, even Dad's old pickup. "Angela can have the house," Carson had scoffed, "as long as she keeps it clean for us." I stood there, invisible, a ghost at my own father's wake, but I wasn't invisible to Dad. Not entirely. A few days before he passed, he'd called me into his study. His voice was weak, but his eyes were sharp. He pressed a thick, sealed envelope into my hand. "Don't let them bully you, Angela," he'd whispered, his grip surprisingly firm. "You listen to Patricia. She knows." He'd made me promise to keep it secret, to trust him. I still clutched that memory, that last moment of connection like a lifeline. The phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. I picked it up, expecting Zoe, my best friend. Instead, it was Patricia Mills, our family lawyer, a woman of 52 who'd known Dad since they were kids. Her voice was crisp. "Angela, the will reading is set for tomorrow morning, 10 sharp. Don't let them bully you. Your father meant what he said." The line went dead, leaving me with a knot of dread and a flicker of something else. Hope. The next morning, the air in Patricia Mills' small, tidy office was thick with unspoken tension. Family members, a few distant cousins, and some older townsfolk who'd known Dad for decades were crammed into the space, their gazes flitting between me and my brothers. Carson, true to form, was holding court near the window, his voice booming. "Soon as this is over, I'm looking at that new stock trailer, and maybe a couple of those quarter horses from the Miller place." Connor chuckled beside him, nodding along. They didn't even glance my way, treating me like I was part of the furniture. My sister Chloe, 30 and usually a quiet presence, sat stiffly on a folding chair, her eyes darting nervously between us all. She offered me a tight, almost apologetic smile, but didn't speak. Patricia cleared her throat, her presence commanding immediate silence. She sat behind her desk, a stack of papers before her. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we are here for the reading of Robert Craig's last will and testament." She began with the usual legal preamble, but my stomach clenched tighter with each passing word. Then she got to it. "To my beloved daughter, Angela Craig, I bequeath all of my real property, including the ranch and all its assets, livestock and equipment. Furthermore, a trust in the amount of $750,000 has been established in her name to be used at her sole discretion for the continued operation and improvement of the ranch." The room went utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Carson's jaw dropped so low I thought it might hit the floor. Connor's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Chloe's eyes widened and she actually gasped. Patricia then looked directly at me, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Angela, your father also left this for you. She pushed a familiar, thick, sealed envelope across the desk, the same one Dad had pressed into my hand. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled beneath a short, handwritten note, was a cashier's check. $750,000. Carson, finally snapping out of his stupor, let out a guttural roar. What? No, that's impossible! He lunged across the desk, his hand reaching for the envelope. Patricia slammed her palm down, a sharp crack echoing in the quiet room. Mr. Craig, I assure you, it is quite possible, and quite legal. The law, I'm afraid, is not on your side. The aftermath of the will reading was a blur of shouting, threats, and Carson's face turning a shade of purple I hadn't thought possible. Patricia, cool as ever, simply repeated that the will was ironclad, witnessed, and legally binding. My brothers tried every trick in the book. First, the emotional manipulation. Angela, you can't do this to us. We're family. Dad would never have wanted this, Carson bellowed, trying to sound heartbroken. Connor chimed in. Think of the ranch, Ang. We built this together. Which was rich, considering they'd spent more time at the local bar than in the fields. Then came the threats. Carson leaned in close, his voice a low growl. You try to kick us out, you'll regret it. This is our home. I just stared back, clutching the envelope with the check inside. Chloe, usually so quiet, stepped forward, her hands clasped. Angela, please, can't we just share? For family's sake. Dad always wanted us to get along. Her plea sounded genuine, but I knew she was just trying to maintain the peace, which always meant me giving in. No, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Dad wanted what he wrote in this will, and I'm going to honour it. I looked at each of them, my gaze unwavering. You have 10 days to move out. Patricia will be sending you formal notice. The silence that followed was deafening. Carson's face twisted in disbelief, then rage. He stormed out, Connor hot on his heels, muttering curses. Chloe lingered, her expression a mix of pity and exasperation, before following them. Within hours, the news had ripped through our small valley town like wildfire. Everyone knew the Craigs, and everyone had an opinion. Some old-timers, loyal to Dad, nodded approvingly, remembering how I'd always been the one doing the real work. But most, especially those who'd always seen Carson as the rightful heir, sided with my brothers. Whispers followed me in the diner. Glares met me at the hardware store. 2 days later, I found it, scrawled in sloppy red paint across the side of the main barn, where everyone driving by could see it. Traitor! My stomach lurched, a cold dread seeping into my bones. It was a clear message. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises outside, the wind rattling the old windows. Around 2 a.m., I heard a distinct creak from downstairs, near Dad's old office. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace and crept down the stairs. The office door was ajar. A sliver of light spilled out. I pushed it open slowly, quietly. And there, hunched over Dad's desk, was Connor. Connor froze, his head snapping up as the office door creaked open further. He was rummaging through Dad's old filing cabinet, papers scattered around him. Angela, what are you doing down here? He stammered, his face pale in the dim light. I live here, Connor. What are you doing? I gripped the poker tighter. He mumbled something about looking for a spare key, but his eyes kept darting to the papers. I didn't buy it for a second. Get out, I said, my voice low and steady. And don't come back in here without my permission. He scrambled up, mumbling apologies, and practically ran out of the house. The next morning, I called a locksmith. New deadbolts went on every exterior door, and I even had a security camera installed overlooking the main barn and the office entrance. Patricia had already started the paperwork to officially transfer the ranch property into my name, a process that would take a few weeks but was irreversible. My loyal childhood friend, Zoe, 27 and sharp as a tack, showed up with coffee and a stack of legal pads. "Okay, Angela, what's the plan? We need to deal with the legal stuff, but also this small town drama." She'd been my rock, offering practical advice and a much-needed ear. Tobias Delgado, our ranch manager, a man of 39 who'd worked for Dad for 20 years, was another unexpected ally. He'd seen everything. "Angela," he'd said, his voice gruff but sincere, "your father always said you had the best head for this place. Whatever you need, I'm with you." His loyalty meant everything. As the 10-day deadline ticked down, Carson and Connor escalated their tactics. Tools disappeared from the workshop. Fences were mysteriously cut, letting a few cattle wander into the neighbours' fields. Nothing major enough to call the sheriff, but enough to cause headaches and cost time. They were trying to wear me down. Then I caught Carson trying to bribe Tobias. I walked into the feed shed to find Carson pressing a wad of cash into Tobias's hand. "Just tell her you're leaving, Tobias. Say you can't work for a woman. We'll make it worth your while." Tobias, without missing a beat, crumpled the money and threw it back at Carson. "You insult me, Carson. Your father taught me loyalty, something you clearly never learned." Carson's face flushed red when he saw me standing there. He stormed off, defeated. Later that day, while cleaning out Dad's old desk, the one Connor had been rummaging through, I found it. Tucked deep in a hidden compartment beneath the false bottom of a drawer was a small leather-bound ledger. It wasn't Dad's usual meticulous record-keeping. This one was different. As I flipped through the pages, my blood ran cold. It detailed years of financial mismanagement, inflated invoices, and unexplained cash withdrawals. My brothers hadn't just been bragging about profits. They'd been skimming them, hiding debts, and systematically bleeding the ranch dry. The ledger was a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about the ranch. It was about years of deliberate deceit. My brothers hadn't just been lazy and entitled. They'd been thieves. I spent the next few days poring over it with Zoe, cross-referencing entries, confirming the numbers. The evidence was damning. The 10-day deadline was up. My brothers were still here, defiant, refusing to leave. I knew I couldn't just kick them out. It would turn into a brawl, and the town would side with them. I needed to hit them where it hurt, their reputation. I called a community meeting at the old Grange Hall. Everyone came, farmers, shopkeepers, neighbours, even the mayor. Carson and Connor swaggered in, looking smug, probably expecting me to break down. Chloe sat quietly in the back, her face unreadable. I stood at the podium, the ledger in my hand. My voice was calm, steady, betraying none of the fury churning inside me. "For years," I began, "my brothers, Carson and Connor, have presented themselves as the rightful stewards of the Craig Ranch. They've taken credit for its successes and blamed its struggles on various external factors." I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the room, landing briefly on their shocked faces. "What they haven't told you is the truth." Then I laid it all out. I read specific entries from the ledger, inflated feed costs, phantom equipment repairs, large cash withdrawals disguised as operational expenses. I showed how they'd been skimming profits, hiding debts, and systematically mismanaging the ranch into the ground. The murmurs grew louder, turning into angry whispers. Faces turned from me to my brothers, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disgust. Carson and Connor tried to interrupt, to deny, but the ledger was undeniable. Their reputations, built on a foundation of lies, crumbled around them. As the meeting dissolved into chaos, Chloe approached me, her eyes red-rimmed. "Angela, you didn't have to do that," she whispered, her voice tight. "You didn't have to ruin them." "They ruined themselves," I countered, my voice flat. Then she dropped her own bomb. I've been sending money to Mom. My estranged mother, Nora. She'd left years ago when I was just a teenager, disappearing without a trace. We hadn't heard from her in over a decade. What? I asked, stunned. Why? She needed it, Chloe said, looking away. She's not doing well. And now she's coming back. She heard about the will. Just as I was reeling from that, Carson pushed through the dispersing crowd, his face contorted with rage. This isn't over, Angela. We'll see you in court. Connor, pale and defeated, just stood behind him. But the ledger, now public knowledge, sealed their fate. No lawyer in their right mind would take that case. Later that evening, the front door opened, and there she was. Nora, 58, looking older, frailer than I remembered. She walked straight up to me, her eyes hard. So, you got all the money, did you, Angela? She said, her voice raspy. Your father was a fool, but I know things. Things about you. Things your father kept secret. And I want my share. Nora's words hung in the air, cold and sharp. Things about you. My past. What could she possibly know that Dad would have kept secret? The question gnawed at me, but I pushed it down. There were more immediate threats. The very next night, the old hay shed, a small outbuilding on the far side of the property, went up in flames. I woke to the frantic shouts of Tobias, the orange glow painting the night sky. By the time the volunteer fire department arrived, it was mostly ashes. No one was hurt, but it was a clear message. I immediately suspected Carson and Connor. It was their style, destructive, petty, and designed to cause maximum disruption. But I had no proof. The fire, coupled with the ongoing tension, made me seriously consider hiring security. Zoe, always practical, agreed. It's not just about the ranch now, Angela. It's about your safety. We started looking into local security firms, though options were limited in our rural area. The town, already divided, became an open battleground. Old family friends, people who'd known Dad for decades, now openly sided with my brothers. You're tearing this family apart, Angela, Mrs. Henderson, who used to bring us pies, yelled at me in the grocery store. Your poor father would be rolling in his grave. It stung, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever. Even Chloe, after her initial confession about Mom, seemed to distance herself, avoiding my calls. One afternoon, a few days after the fire, our closest neighbour, old Mr. Abernathy, stopped by. He was a quiet man, rarely meddled. He shuffled his feet, looking uncomfortable. Angela, he started, his voice low. I saw something the other night, near your hay shed just before the fire. My heart pounded. It wasn't your brother's. I saw Chloe's car, parked down the road near the old oak. She was walking away from your place real fast, just before the smoke started. My mind reeled. Chloe, it made no sense. She'd always been the peacemaker, the one trying to avoid conflict. But Mr. Abernathy had no reason to lie. The twist was a gut punch, adding another layer of betrayal to the already tangled mess. That evening, I found a folded piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. It was a crude drawing of a burning ranch house, and scrawled beneath it, in shaky, anonymous handwriting, were the words, "Restore the family's legacy, or pay the price." The threat was chillingly clear. The anonymous note, coupled with Mr. Abernathy's confession, hardened something inside me. It wasn't just about the ranch anymore. It was about drawing a line. I met with Patricia again, armed with the ledger and Mr. Abernathy's reluctant testimony about Chloe. She advised against involving the police directly in the arson, without more concrete evidence, but agreed we had enough to force a mediated settlement. We scheduled a final confrontation at the ranch house, a last-ditch attempt to avoid a protracted legal battle. Patricia, Zoe, Tobias, my brothers, Chloe, and even Nora were present. The air was thick with resentment. Patricia laid out the terms. Given the irrefutable evidence of financial mismanagement and the recent incidents, Angela is prepared to offer a final, non-negotiable settlement. She looked directly at Carson and Connor. You will relinquish any and all claims to the Craig Ranch, its assets, and any portion of the trust. In return, Angela will allow you to take your personal belongings. The funds that would have been your share of the ranch's liquid assets will be used to settle the hidden debts you accrued, with the remainder donated to local charities in your father's name. Carson exploded. You bitch! You're destroying this family! You're taking everything! He lunged forward, but Tobias stepped between us, his presence a solid wall. My voice was cold, devoid of emotion. You destroyed this family, Carson. You and Connor, with your greed and your lies. You bled this ranch dry while I worked myself to the bone. You mocked me, dismissed me, and thought you were untouchable. I'm simply holding you accountable for the mess you made. Connor, defeated, slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Chloe, her face pale, avoided my gaze. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she whispered, but it was too late. Nora, ever the opportunist, tried one last time. Angela, what about me? Your father owed me. I looked at her, my mother who had abandoned me. You left, Nora. You forfeited any claim years ago. The siblings left one by one. Carson, still cursing, his face contorted with hatred. Connor, silent, broken. Chloe, tears streaming down her face, hurried out without a word. Nora, seeing her last hope vanish, simply turned and walked out, disappearing back into her quiet exile. And then I was alone. The house was silent. The wide sky outside the window was turning a deep indigo as dusk settled. I had won. The ranch was mine, truly mine. But the victory felt hollow, tinged with the bitter ashes of what was once my family. I stood there, the weight of it all pressing down on me, victorious but profoundly shaken. The dust settled, both literally and figuratively, in the valley. The days that followed the final confrontation were strangely quiet. My brothers, Carson and Connor, quickly became pariahs in town. Their names, once synonymous with the Craig Ranch, were now whispered with disdain. No one would hire them. No one would do business with them. I saw them occasionally, looking haggard, trying to find work at other ranches, only to be turned away. Their arrogance had been replaced by a bitter resentment, but it was clear they were struggling, unable to adapt to a world where they weren't in charge. Chloe packed her bags and left town within a week, without saying goodbye. I saw her car loaded down, heading east on the highway, and knew she wouldn't be back. Nora, true to her nature, simply vanished again. The threat she'd made about knowing secrets about my past had been just that, a threat, empty words from a desperate woman with no real leverage. She never returned, and I never heard from her again. The ranch, however, began to breathe. With the hidden debt settled and the trust money providing a solid foundation, Tobias and I, with Zoe's sharp mind for numbers, started to implement the changes I dreamed of for years. We invested in new equipment, rotated crops, and brought in healthier livestock. The fields, once neglected, began to flourish. Tobias, a man of quiet strength, became more than a manager. He was a true partner, his loyalty unwavering. Zoe, my steadfast friend, helped me navigate the complex world of ranch finances and community relations, always there with a supportive word or a no-nonsense solution. They were my trusted inner circle, the family I chose. I often found myself riding out at dawn, just as the sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, the crisp morning air filling my lungs. The ranch stretched out before me, vast and alive. It was mine, truly mine, bought with my father's faith and my own hard-won battle. I had gained justice, a profound, undeniable victory. But the cost was immense. My family, broken and scattered, was gone. The girl who'd once longed for her brother's approval was long dead, replaced by a woman hardened by betrayal and the sting of vengeance. Sometimes a chill would run through me, a ghost of the anger and pain that had driven me. I had been ruthless, unyielding. Was it worth it? The question lingered, a quiet echo in the vast silence of the valley. The ranch was thriving, a testament to my will. But the path to get here had been paved with ashes. I was the queen of this domain now, haunted yet undeniably proud,